Welcome to NewYorkBIO's virtual breakfast series, a digital program started in 2020 featuring fireside chats with leaders from across the healthcare spectrum. This week's episode features Nolan Townsend, an executive who brings commercial leadership experience from every corner of the globe to the CEO role at Lexio Therapeutics, a clinical stage gene therapy company founded in New York City.
All right. Good morning, everyone. We're thrilled that you're here with us. My name is Jennifer Hawks Bland, and I'm the CEO at NewYorkBIO. We have an amazing guest today who's not only covered lots of territory in his career, but literally the world. So we look forward to talking to Nolan Townsend. And yet again, I hesitate to call Lexio a startup. Let's call it early stage, right? And thank you so much to our sponsor, Goodwin Procter, the law firm. They have been fantastic partners for our breakfast series, even going back as far as last year when we were figuring things out and how to do things remotely during COVID. Our COVID in this case is to your advantage because we get to hear from guests like Nolan. So I'm going to kick it over to Derek to introduce Nolan, and then we'll have our conversation. But lest I forget, which I almost always do each week, your questions are welcome. Please send them in throughout our conversation with Nolan. Use the Q&A feature or the chat, and we'll be glad to get to those as we can. So thank you, Nolan. We're looking forward to our discussion.
Yeah, happy to be here. Happy to be here.
All right. Good morning. So Nolan, how are you? It's great to have you. One of the nice things about being in launch labs with people is you put a name and a face to the press release. So we were really excited as of earlier this year when you announced your $85 million Series A. I read this and said, "Oh, this is amazing." You kind of it's such a great community, and it's wonderful to see what you've been able to do with Lexio. But we're gonna wind the clock back a little bit. And we tend to like to start with a little bit of an origin story. So if you can, just introduce yourself and tell the audience a little bit about how you got to where you are today.
Sure. So I'm originally from Los Angeles, so kind of a California kid. I went to the East Coast for college and business school, and kind of never made it back to California. And I've worked mainly in the biopharmaceutical industry in a few different types of roles over my career. Prior to coming to Lexio, I spent 12 years at Pfizer, and prior to Pfizer, I worked at Lehman Brothers in healthcare investment banking. And at Pfizer, I worked across a variety of roles, corporate finance, corporate strategy in Pfizer's New York headquarters. And then a string of commercial leadership and general management roles, both in and outside of the U.S. These were roles starting in Asia, which we can talk about each of them. But I was head of marketing for Pfizer's business in South Korea. I was then moved to a role as the country general manager for Pfizer's business in Ukraine. And then a similar role as country general manager of Pfizer's business in Romania. Then the organization structure at Pfizer changed to more of a divisional structure. And at that time, I moved to a position as regional president for Pfizer's vaccines business in the Africa, Middle East, and India region. So I was based in Dubai for that role. I was there, relatively short time. It was around the time where if you remember this, probably the Allergan transaction didn't move through. So the organization structure changed a bit again at that time. And I then moved to a position as area president for the international rare disease business based in London. And I was there for a couple of years, and then moved to a role leading the equivalent business in the North America region in rare disease. So those are, I guess, a number of the roles that I held at Pfizer, with probably the majority of the time in the most, more recent positions I spent in the rare disease business, there at Pfizer. And then, more recently, a little over a year, I've been at Lexio as CEO, and Lexio is a clinical stage gene therapy company. We're focused on both rare and non-rare monogenic diseases and some other acquired diseases in our preclinical pipeline.
Well, that's fantastic. So ticking down the list, you have Seoul, Kiev, Bucharest, Dubai, London. You've really kind of been everywhere. And, I imagine that, kind of going to every corner of the world, it gives you a little bit more of an appreciation for, I would say, healthcare at a bit of a local level. Right? Can you talk about maybe some of the differences that you've seen within the various healthcare systems as it relates to basically patients getting access to the therapies that we develop?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, the healthcare systems are so different geographically. I mean, and it's really, in a way you find that it's embedded within there's the economics of healthcare, which are different depending on where you are in the world, if you're in an emerging country versus a developed one. But you also see the culture of the country reflect itself into the healthcare system as well. So I would, first start with sort of let's say emerging markets countries, which do not have either government supported or even really private insurance systems. These are in a way patient funded healthcare systems. Patients pay out of pocket for medicines and for healthcare. So these are, for example, countries like Ukraine, which I would put on one end, where the healthcare system and the drug system is fully patient supported. People walk in and pay cash for their prescriptions. And there's a number of countries in the Africa Middle East region with a similar dynamic to that. And I say that's very typical of emerging markets countries. But interestingly, in markets like that, and where I see the culture come into play, patients typically do prefer branded products. So despite what you would expect, that they would be very price sensitive and would choose the least expensive treatment that they can find, they actually prefer branded products in the same way that consumers walking into a CVS or a Walgreens prefer branded consumer products as well. So you find it's a little bit more of a consumer health type of business construct that you have in markets like that. And then on the other end, you have countries that are highly centralized, government-led healthcare systems. Like I'm thinking of the UK and a lot of the Western European markets. And I would say those are on the other end of the spectrum, where the government is really funding the entirety of the healthcare costs. They have, very tight controls on the cost of the system, access to medicines, and so on. So I think and then there's everything in between. But I would say that, for our industry, I really see there's a lot of growth in those emerging markets countries as they begin to move up the continuum towards, fully developed healthcare systems. And so I think that that's one of the things we should continue to think about when we think about access to treatment, is that you have emerging countries that are really going to move up that continuum very rapidly as they grow their economies and they kind of develop their healthcare systems as well.
Yep. So when you think about where you are now in terms of developing gene therapies, and instead of calling you a startup, I think we can call you a clinical stage company, because you guys have two therapies in the pipeline and in clinical trials. Is there a little bit of a contrast when you're thinking? You've spent some time thinking about and working with the vaccines business in India and the Middle East. And that really is again kind of the polar opposite of what we think of when we think of a gene therapy, right? You think of a gene therapy and it's this end of the scale. It's usually expensive. It's extremely precise. And then you think about vaccines, and you think of how cheap can you make them, blanket, get them to everybody. Can you talk a little bit about kind of the dynamics of both of those situations in relation to innovation, right? How do you think about innovation and delivery in terms of vaccines as opposed to a gene therapy now?
Yeah, I mean, the thing you learn when you work in vaccines is you want to vaccinate everyone. That's the goal when you introduce a vaccine. And so any approach you're taking in the vaccines business should be focused there. I'd say rare disease is the opposite. You're trying to find the needle in a haystack. A lot of times patients are underdiagnosed. They're not necessarily aware of the rare disease that they have. So a big portion of work in rare disease is actually to help diagnose patients and to help them find their path to the right treatment for their disease. So I'd say, but I would separate gene therapy and rare disease. I mean, today's gene therapy today is mainly focused in rare diseases. And I think that's, just given where the science is, that Monogenic targets are in a way low-hanging fruit for today's gene therapy. But I think our view at Lexio is that, that may not always be the case. We will see, and I think, our pipeline is hopefully beginning to demonstrate that there, are gene therapy solutions for, non-rare diseases as well. But let's, first, I think start and talk about rare disease, because I think this is today where, gene therapy can have the most significant, impact for, for patients.
Mhm.
And two of our clinical stage programs are in, monogenic, rare diseases. And I'd say there's a few, opportunities and challenges, for this. The first one is that, in a lot of cases where we're, delivering a gene therapy into a disease that does not have an existing treatment option, the whole topic of access becomes, comes front and center, because there is no, existing budget for the treatment of that disease in a lot of cases. I
Right.
think about diseases like, Friedreich's ataxia, Duchenne's muscular dystrophy, and so on, where there aren't really, treatment options out there, but you'd like to deliver a gene therapy for patients to benefit from. But there's questions about, what should this therapy be? What should the price be? And sort of how
Yeah.
can you ensure access for, for patients? I think that the thing for gene therapy that's really attractive is that the ability to, in a way, deliver a functional cure to a disease is very attractive over a long term in terms of, creating cost savings for the healthcare system. If you think about, today, I use hemophilia as an example. A hemophilia patient in the U.S. would probably cost the healthcare system around, $400,000, per year, let's say, and this is with recombinant factor replacement treatments, let's say. So this patient would have those treatments for their entire lifetime. With some of the gene therapy options that, may be out there for patients, hopefully soon, this could be a one-time, functional cure to the disease. And so you would ultimately see a patient that would, cost the healthcare system less over, if you look at it over 5, 10, 15-year time period. So I think gene therapy is one of the, few modalities that's out there that actually has the potential to create, very significant cost savings for healthcare systems globally over time. The question is just, there will be an initial higher cost versus the existing treatment options that are there. So I think we're really excited about the possibility of gene therapy for, what it can do for patients in terms of treating disease, but also ultimately what gene therapy can deliver in terms of savings to healthcare systems. And I think, again, this applies not only for, the developed markets healthcare systems, but also to some of the emerging market systems where, the treatment costs of today's, today's rare disease treatments may be more than they can spend, for patients in their countries.
Yeah, so
Yep.
we actually, New York Bio does a lot of obviously advocacy work at the state level. That's one of our most significant remits. And we did a gene therapy briefing for legislators. It feels like it was 5 years ago, but I guess it was 2 years ago.
Yeah.
And we brought in patient speakers, and they were both from hemophilia related organizations. And it was interesting as we talked, it was almost like a light bulb. You could see, right? The legislators, they were like, oh, okay, so you're talking about not just delaying, you're talking about vitiating the entire cost structure of the disease. And another thing that we've done some work on, which I'd be interested in your take, at least initially, is trying to work with the state on being open to alternative payment methods and alternative payment arrangements for these types of therapies, just because it is a lot of upfront cost. And
Mhm.
and if it doesn't work, then the state is obviously concerned about
Yeah.
the being left paying for something that didn't help one of their, particularly in this case, right, Medicaid beneficiaries.
Yeah.
So I mean, I have thoughts on this. I, worked on access with, governments outside of the U.S. for quite a bit,
Yeah.
and then access, in the U.S. with the health insurers. I mean, I think, the current model today is medicines are paid for as they're consumed, right? But if you look at other, sectors, you can finance the cost of certain, of certain things. Or if you go to buy a car today, you can finance the car, you can pay over time. If an airline goes to buy an airplane from Boeing, they can finance the cost of that airplane. So I think if you begin to think about healthcare in that way, gene therapy is an ideal modality that should be considered for a construct such as financing, so that it's not paid upon consumption, it's paid over the, let's say, quote, useful life of the actual gene therapy, which would probably be the, time in which we have, data to support the efficacy that you see with gene therapy. I just think there needs to be work done behind the scenes in terms of the, design of the U.S. insurance system to support that. One of the major challenges is that, patients can move insurance plans annually. So let's say one insurance plan pays for gene therapy, the cost is spread over 3 or 4 years, but in the year 2, a patient moves to a new insurance plan. That new insurance plan benefits from the this lower cost patient, and the first insurance plan has paid for the gene therapy initially. So I think there's that, if they call it portability, that's one challenge in the U.S. that needs to be addressed. You would think in these single payer markets outside of the U.S., this wouldn't be an issue. If you're a patient, sitting in the UK and the UK government pays for the cost of your treatment in year 1, they continue to benefit, for actually the, entire time you remain in that country. Interestingly, the governments in Europe are as sensitive to near-term budget impact as a lot of US health insurers are. So and so it's not as much portability as an issue. It's just more of their, their annual budgets and the extent to which those can, to the extent to which they cannot increase on an annual basis. So I think that the challenge will be, a similar one outside of the US as to what we will have in the US. But I think if you look at it over a long enough time period, whether it's 5 years or more, you will see that gene therapy will produce cost savings, significant cost savings for healthcare systems. It's just looking at it over the right time period.
And it's hard to put a dollar on the quality of life change that will give in some some therapeutic areas, particularly.
Sorry, I was just answering a question in the chat because we actually had a question about the APOE4 target, which is one of the things that you guys are targeting. Before we get to that, though, I wanted to talk a little bit about, kind of how you got to Lexio, right? You're at Pfizer, you're working in rare diseases. How did you find Lexio, or how did Lexio find you? And really, what made you jump, out of Pfizer into this, exciting new thing that, probably had no people and no money and existed in a PowerPoint deck?
Yeah. So in my work in rare disease at Pfizer, I was very exposed to and working with a lot of the gene therapy, strategy, business development, and kind of commercial planning work that Pfizer was doing in this area. And I really, felt that I gravitated to that part of Pfizer's business. I thought this is a research platform for reasons we've discussed. It can, produce ultimately this significant cost savings for the healthcare system. So it can be a solution to some of the challenges that, we're seeing within healthcare today. I also thought just the impact that this modality can have, for patients in terms of actually, delivering functional cures to diseases. I thought, this is exactly what society is asking for the biopharma industry to deliver is quote, cures, I put in quotes. And so the opportunity to have a chance to go really focus on that at this point in my career was one that I was, very excited about. And not to say, I think Pfizer's a great company. I think, their gene therapy franchise will be, very successful. But, for me to say I'm going to spend 100% of my time, focused in gene therapy was something I was really excited about. And I met, Ronald Crystal, who's our scientific founder. And, I knew him to be one of the pioneers in the gene therapy field. He was involved with dosing the first patient with gene therapy utilizing a virus in the early 90s. And he's been involved with, several other milestones in the field since. And he had developed this really interesting, pipeline of gene therapy programs in his academic lab. And I think we shared a common vision for, where gene therapy could go. That, today it was focused on, rare monogenic diseases, but ultimately could be applied to into larger diseases over time. And so that was kind of the vision with which we took the Lexio opportunity forward, was really to first focus on monogenic rare diseases, but then begin to look at much acquired diseases, non-rare diseases, and so on into the future. So that's really what brought me to Lexio. I think the location played a role as well, in that the genetic medicine lab at Weill Cornell is on the Upper East Side. I live here in near Madison Square Park. So I think just also our location played a role in the opportunity coming together. I think if I had to move to San Francisco or Boston to really pursue this, I probably wouldn't have done it. So I think all of those factors came together, and in combination with the fact that myself and Dr. Crystal thought we had very complementary skill sets for a company like Lexio and what we wanted to accomplish. So those were some of the factors that really brought me to Lexio.
Yeah, we're going to go ahead and just basically cut that last segment and send it to the NYC EDC and just basically put that on a billboard. I don't think I've ever heard anybody, say right out front, yeah, you know what, if it was in Boston or San Francisco, I just wouldn't do it. But because it was in New York, that was really a draw. So perfect. Thank you. That your check is in the mail.
It's our new New York Bio ad.
Well, I mean, just to hit on that, I think it's an interesting time for the growth of the New York biotech industry. All the tools are here, right? So we have, prominent scientific institutions here, Columbia, Cornell, Mount Sinai, and others. The talent is here as well. I think we may touch on this, but you have a number of pharma companies that are in the New York, New Jersey area, where you have talented people that have wanted to work in biotech but have not wanted to relocate their families to other cities in order to do that. So I think, and you have now a growing number of incubators that are emerging, like Alexandria and this new Deerfield building. So I think all of the tools are here to really have growth in the New York biotech industry. And in addition, a lot of the investors are here as well, right? And I think for them, it's easy if they have portfolio companies that are physically located in the same city. They feel like they can be a bit closer to those companies. So I think all of those things play to the advantage of New York as a future biotech hub.
Yep. So you just closed a big financing in January, and I imagine you predominantly raised all of that money basically during the pandemic. So can you comment a little bit about what it was like to raise a really big A round virtually?
I think it's easier, frankly, than previous, because in the previous environment, you would have been required to physically go and have face-to-face meetings, in a number of the different cities where investors may be located, in San Francisco, Boston, maybe places in Europe as well. And I think the ability to do this over Zoom allowed you to have more meetings over a shorter time period. And I also think because these meetings are done over Zoom, more investors are willing to take the meetings in the first place. So the idea of having to sort of invite someone into the office and accommodate a face-to-face meeting probably means they would have done fewer of them. So I think that it's a bit easier, and I hope it stays like this. I know I've heard from other companies and from some of the investment bankers, they've gotten a lot of IPOs done over a much shorter period of time, given they're now being done over Zoom. So, my hope is that this continues, into the future, and this becomes a new way that companies can go out and raise capital, and over Zoom versus all in person. Now, I do think at some point, once you have a board and you really need to partner with your investors there. There is some benefit to being able to meet face to face and have dinner and lunches together. But I think for capital raising and and what is a little bit of a transactional sort of interface with investors, I think Zoom works fine for that.
Yeah. So let me ask you, I've heard from a number of people that, like you said, like the first meeting is easier, right? It's easier to get people to kind of take the first step into the door. Can you talk a little bit about really the diligence and the other stuff that's necessary to kind of get the financing closed? I mean, Was your round mainly from folks that had already been interested in the company and knew you a bit, or did you sign on new investors here? How did the final pieces come together? Because I think that's significant. Usually people like the in-person, the in-person eyeball test, so to speak. But how was that part of the financing, getting that done?
Yeah, so there was one investor that I think was close to the opportunity the entire time, and it was
Hmm.
the kind of lead partner there, someone that I'd known for a couple of years, and so there was an existing relationship there. The rest of the investors that ultimately joined the syndicate were investors we met, during the during the capital raise process. So it was a combination of both, I would say. I don't think the diligence efforts were materially diminished by needing to do them over Zoom. I think they are,
Hmm.
in a lot of cases, very technical conversations about the science or, CMC or any, many other topics. I think they actually lend themselves to Zoom because you can have stakeholders from various different places, whether it's the, consultants that the venture funds hire to help them, complete diligence, with the company, with the fund itself. These could be, people sitting in different locations that are able to come together to discuss these topics, and you can have more meetings in a shorter time frame in that way as well. So I think the entire process was, from my point of view, maybe even enhanced by being able to do it over Zoom, because you could do more over a
Yeah.
shorter time frame.
Well,
I
even
also imagine it.
oh, I was just gonna say, like, even in New York City alone, going cross town, we may find we're talking to people on Zoom permanently sometimes just to avoid the crosstown trip during the traffic.
Yeah, and for a small company with not a lot of resources, obviously not having to get on airplanes and stay in hotel rooms, obviously it saves money. So it's always a good thing as well.
Yeah.
I imagine it was also helpful that you're in the clinic, or as you were raising, we're about to go into the clinic, right? I find that people probably have a little bit of better grasp of that in terms of risk assessment and thinking about the clinical development plan and really a handle on the science, probably more so than we have a platform and here's what we'd like to do with it. You're probably in a slightly advantaged position of we have a platform, we have a pipeline, here's where the pipeline is, and by the way, we're in patients and this is when the readouts are on our clinical development plan.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think we are in the privileged position to have clinical stage programs and programs with some clinical data. So I think that did play to our advantage in this process. I think that though we do as a company hit the ground from kind of a running start, we really need to build, and we have been building very quickly, our clinical development, clinical operations team, our CMC team, to move to later stage studies and be able to manufacture the vector for that. So I think we're in a great position as a company, and we're excited about where we're headed. I think from a financing perspective, it's not common that investors see a clinical stage company that's raising a Series A. But I think we've
Yep.
also constructed a syndicate with typical venture investors, but also some crossover and long only investors as well. So we have a mix of investors that I think really matches the stage of our programs, and I think will help us with future financings and to get kind of to the right place from an overall kind of company development perspective.
Nolan,
Yep.
can you talk to us about the building and about the hiring, like over the last year, particularly with COVID? like how did you? First of all, in January of 20, how many employees did Lexio have, and how many do you have today? And then talk to us about that expansion journey.
Yeah, so we in January of 20 it was 3 or 4 employees, and not all of them were full time. And we had a number of consultants that were working with us, which is typical for companies at this stage. You don't
Yep.
necessarily need full-time employees across all of the different activities that you have ongoing. We're growing very quickly. I think we actually just doubled in size in the last couple of weeks. So I'd say by mid-year we'll have around 20 employees or thereabouts. It's kind of our target. I think hiring during COVID is certainly more challenging than what I've seen previously. In that we have a lot of people that are joining the company that I've never met in person, or the rest of our team has never actually met in person. So I think you do need to spend some time ensuring there's the right cultural fit and the right vision for where the company should go in respect to that given function that the colleague is leading. So I think that's a challenge, probably a challenge that every company is dealing with. I am looking forward to the time where we can begin to go back to the office and the team can get to know each other better, because I think that whatever strategy, assets you have, whatever programs you have that you're pursuing, the culture of the company and really that that real drive to work together to succeed and to drive the company forward is ultimately what will determine long-term success. And so I always get a bit concerned that the online and Zoom platforms are just a little bit transactional. You get on Zoom to have the meeting, you have the meeting topic. You may stay on a little bit longer to have some ancillary discussions, but that doesn't match sort of being able to have lunch together, or grab a drink after work, or even just the water cooler chats you would have in between meetings. So I do think that's something that's important for a company at this stage, is ultimately to get ourselves back into an office together and begin to kind of get to know each other from a beyond just the transactional sort of meeting topics that we cover over Zoom.
Yeah. No, I think that's right. I think that obviously is a big discussion among all of New York Bio members. Clearly, people have been doing lab work throughout, right? That didn't stop. It may have paused, but generally that's been back. But the next question is, when are folks going to be back in the offices? And I think it's so individual and company specific, but then beyond that, very individual as to when people will feel comfortable.
I agree.
Yep. So I wanted to ask you specifically, because we've talked a bit about kind of the impact of gene therapy on particular patient populations. And as we have, we're putting together a patient engagement summit in early April. Really to kind of recognize both the voice of the patient and the role of the patient in innovation. So could you talk a little bit about either how your view on that has evolved, or how you think about it in terms of Lexio? Because we think this is an area that is only going to get stronger, given the amount of the groundswell of information we have about our health, and the greater connectivity between patients and what they can measure and how they can think about their healthcare. So can you talk a little bit about that from a company perspective? How do you think about involving the patient, or the role of the patient, if you will, in how we develop new therapies?
Yeah, I think this was one of the most important learnings that I had, having spent a number of years working in rare disease, is just how important the role is of patients in that area. And not to say it's unimportant elsewhere, but I think the motivation of patients in a lot of rare diseases where there is no existing treatment, to work with the pharma company or the biotech company to really advance treatment options is, they're very highly motivated, and they'd like to collaborate at a very early stage with companies such as ours and obviously others to advance treatments. And so I saw that at Pfizer, and it's the same experience that I'm having now at Lexio, is that we're partnering with patient associations at a very early stage with topics such as the design of our clinical studies, even in some cases to understand their view on a treatment option such as gene therapy for their particular disease. And I think it helps us to frame really what we should focus on and where we should spend our time. We found the patient groups and the areas that we're focused in to be very collaborative. And also understanding of the stage of our company, and we don't have significant resources like some of the larger pharma companies do to really partner with them on a financial basis, but we can work together with them to better understand the disease and ultimately to help to bring our therapies forward. So that's a type of work that we're doing with patient groups today, and I would say we'll continue to do that as we go forward. And I think that's in a way common to a lot of rare diseases that are out there today.
Do you think that other let's say pharma companies in the non-rare disease space should think about partnering more effectively or differently with patient groups as well? That it should not just be limited to the rare disease space?
Yeah, I think there's, what I saw is if you take a look at some of the pharma companies, they bring learnings from the non-rare disease areas into rare disease, and that can benefit how they think about, for example, commercializing, rare disease treatments. But I think there are learnings that you gain from rare disease that can be brought into, other areas. I think the idea of how you look at diagnosis in rare disease and the diagnostic journey is a learning that can be brought out of rare disease into other areas. I think that the collaboration and closeness to patients is an area is a idea that can be brought out of rare disease into other areas. So I think there's some kind of mutually beneficial learnings going both ways for companies that have both rare and non-rare disease areas. And frankly, we are one of those as well. So we have, if, for example, in our lead programs, 2 of them are in rare diseases. One's an ultra rare disease, and there's, probably less than 1,000 patients with this disease. And then on the other end, we have a program for APOE4 related Alzheimer's disease, of which, it's a genetic target, but it's not a rare disease necessarily. So I think we're going to have the same dynamic even within Lexio for our programs in terms of how we partner with some of the patient groups in the rare disease area, but then ultimately also in the Alzheimer's area where we're focused as well.
Yeah. So I'd like to actually ask a couple of things about that, because this is I think where we're headed in terms of therapeutics getting more specific for for designated populations. And I imagine there's a pretty significant education frontier, right? Whenever anyone talks about a therapeutic for Alzheimer's disease, we mentioned the huge numbers and the growing numbers of people with Alzheimer's disease, and they're desperate for solutions. So have you thought about the types of communication that you would need to have in terms of how to identify people with this variant, why it would help people with this variant, and especially on the other side of the equation, being able to explain to patients why it won't help certain sections of the population? I think there's probably a good amount of education that is going to come with the development of gene therapies for what we can call kind of non-rare diseases.
Yeah, I think, I think as with many other diseases, beginning to understand the genetics of the disease is playing a role in improving the understanding of actually how to treat the disease. And I think, Alzheimer's, I think we're finding is no different in that regard. And so, today, and just for some background, for everyone, we're focused on the APOE4 gene variant, which has a very high link to the development of Alzheimer's disease. If you're, for example, an APOE4 homozygote, you have a 15 to 20 times higher likelihood of developing Alzheimer's. And there's numbers out there suggesting that almost 80% of Alzheimer's patients have one APOE4 allele. So you can see it's a highly enriched population from a genetic profile perspective in Alzheimer's disease. So I think that gives us some clear understanding of where we need to look for solutions to treat this disease. However, if you look today, a lot of neurologists are not yet testing for the gene variant associated with the disease, and that idea is not uncommon if you look at other genetic diseases, right? It's a similar trend to what you see across many rare diseases. You have specialists that have been trained to look for certain symptoms, and those symptoms they then diagnose as certain diseases. And oftentimes the more rare diagnosis is not one they ultimately think of. And I've seen this in many rare diseases. So I think if ultimately the APOE4 gene variant is one that there is a therapy for, and I think we're increasing our understanding that this is where there needs to be some focus. I think we'll have to do a lot of the same work that has been done in many rare diseases to educate the broad population of physicians that treat patients with this disease, that they need to really think about the genetic profile of the patients. But I think this comes hand in hand with a treatment. So as physicians begin to understand that there is a treatment for patients with that gene variant, then they begin to think about understanding the genetic profile and then the patient eligibility for treatment. But I think that is work that, you know, both us and others that are working in the Alzheimer's field need to do more of. But it is work that I've seen very successfully in other, you know, in other rare disease areas as well.
We actually have a question that I think is on point for now. It says ApoE4 is a risk factor as opposed to PS1 or APP mutation. What was the rationale for picking ApoE4 as opposed to PS1? Considering this is not going to be a pill, do you worry about acceptance?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think the reason we thought about this is the following. I mentioned that ApoE4s have a higher likelihood of developing Alzheimer's, but you know, ApoE2s have a lower risk of developing Alzheimer's. But interestingly, if you're an E2 E4 heterozygote, the existence of E2 removes the E4 risk, and you go back to normal. So the E2 is clearly protective against what results from the E4 mutate from the E4 gene variant, let's say. So I think it becomes a natural sort of approach for gene therapy to tackle. And so we're delivering the ApoE2 gene to the CNS of ApoE4 homozygotes, thereby hopefully altering their CNS to become E2 E4 heterozygotes, giving them the same protective advantages that an E2 E4 heterozygote has. So that was the reason for the target that that we chose. In terms of acceptance, I think the proof will be in the data that we're able to deliver here. I mean, in our phase 1 study, we're looking at not only the E2 E4 ratio, but we're looking at the biomarkers which are common for Alzheimer's disease, so tau, phospho-tau, amyloid beta, all of these biomarkers. So I think even out of our phase 1, we'll begin to see if delivering ApoE2 to the CNS of ApoE4 homozygotes does impact some of the biomarkers that are common for Alzheimer's disease. And then later, hopefully, if we move the program to a phase 3 study, we will begin to see if we're impacting cognitive decline. I think for an area like this, which has no existing treatment, and the ability to deliver a potential one-time, and this is an intracisternal administered treatment, so it's an outpatient procedure. One-time treatment to really hopefully impact this disease could be a very compelling treatment option for patients, I think, particularly if we demonstrate that it's safe, and then we have strong both biomarker and clinical benefit data behind us. So I think we're really excited about this, and it's really a new approach to treating Alzheimer's disease. Many of the existing approaches have been focused on either amyloid beta or tau or phospho-tau or some combination of these. And we're really focused on treating the genetics of Alzheimer's disease, recognizing that the pathogenesis is likely multivariate. And so treating the genetics will have this downstream benefit in a number of different places. So this is why we're excited about our Alzheimer's program.
So when would you administer this therapy, and what does the clinical development path look like? So when do you administer? Is it before onset of symptoms or after? And what does your ultimate phase 3 look like? How long do you have to follow patients? Is it something where you have to see if they develop other symptoms? What is the actual clinical outcome that you're focused on?
Yeah. I think our phase 1, these are patients with mild cognitive impairment. So they do have symptoms of Alzheimer's disease. And this is what allows us to look at the biomarkers which are associated with Alzheimer's. So I think that's what we're looking at today. This is really a safety study, but it has some, we're able to have a view into the biomarkers there as well. From a longer term clinical development perspective, I think, you ask an interesting question. I would see clearly a version of this therapy that could potentially benefit patients that have Alzheimer's disease today or early versions of it. But I think if we can demonstrate that it's safe, there's a natural question of, could you treat patients that do not yet have symptoms of Alzheimer's disease? That's something we don't yet have an answer to. I think we would be working with the FDA to understand better the appetite for that type of indication, but there is the theoretical possibility of that, in the future with the gene therapy approach. So I think, for us now, our focus is on, completing this phase 1 study. And then once we understand the results of this study, we'll be looking at how we consider other indications and other approaches to treat the disease in the future.
Yep. Okay. Let me see.
There was a question about, it says, is there a pre-gene therapy that can develop early detection with biomarkers?
Early detection of Alzheimer's. So I think the approach we're taking in terms of our inclusion criteria for the study is patients should have mild cognitive impairment, but they also should have the biomarkers that are consistent with Alzheimer's disease. And I think a lot of those are relatively well established today. So in terms of tau, phospho-tau, amyloid beta, amyloid PET scans, and so on, I think those the sort of criteria for what sort of exhibits Alzheimer's disease and those biomarkers is relatively clear. So I think we do understand that. I think that the question that's out there still is sort of what response should these biomarkers have to various types of treatments that we see in Alzheimer's disease, and to what extent are those biomarkers then correlated to cognitive decline. And I think that's the point that I think the field is still trying to understand a bit better.
Yeah. Okay, I wanted to get to this really before we got to the end of our time, so we're doing a bit of a hard pivot here. But we, at New York Bio, we also have an ongoing initiative in diversity, equity, inclusion, and I wanted to just kind of bring up this topic with you because we're talking about it more and more. We're trying to focus on including virtually everyone we can in biotech discussions and positions of leadership, et cetera. So I wondered if we could ask you to just kind of reflect both, on your situation now as a CEO and really on your career, and kind of how, any of those discussions or viewpoints have affected you, and how do you think about it?
Yeah, I mean, I think you see very few African American CEOs in biotech today. I think I know them all. There's about 5. It's if you look at the hundreds of biotechs that are out there and the number of African American CEOs, there's obviously that it doesn't represent the right level of diversity. I mean, I think there are a few factors that play into that. I think one is I've seen a lot of the pharma companies that are doing more in terms of diversity. I still think there are some gaps in even the senior leadership at pharma companies, and the extent to which colleagues that have entered those organizations have been able to, make it to senior positions. And I know this is always something that, we talked a lot about at Pfizer, is how to improve diversity at more senior levels. But I think the diverse talent from pharma could theoretically be a feeder for diverse talent into biotech, but you don't see as much of that, transition occurring. And I think, part of this, it could be, and it's what I've understood, is that there's a view that there's a certain, subjectivity to the kind of venture financing process itself, and that subjectivity may not play to the advantage of diverse candidates, and or they may not have the networks among, the kind of venture investment field generally that, could lend themselves to being able to successfully raise capital. I think you see this both, and maybe in biotech, but also I hear the same thing from tech venture investing as well. There's just a small percentage of venture capital that's actually going to diverse, management teams and founders and so on. So I think the challenge for diversity is one that's common to all venture funded companies. It's not only biotech, it's also probably the tech sector. And I think that's probably, it should be looked at, on that basis, is sort of from the venture end, how to improve diversity and where, the capital is actually going. But I think from sort of getting candidates from pharma to move into biotech that are of diverse backgrounds, I think that's work that, we in the biotech industry need to do to ensure that there's an understanding of diverse candidates, of the attractiveness of coming to do something like this, how there are, great opportunities for, different people of minority populations in biotech, and really, paving the way for people to really consider this as a viable career option, for themselves. And so I think that's, work that all of us need to do to really increase the understanding for diverse candidates of what this biotech sector can offer them from a career opportunity perspective.
That's interesting. I hadn't really thought. So at New York Bio, we have we've pulled together a sort of cross-functional task force, right, to work on the issues. And one of our buckets is support of diverse entrepreneurs. That's sort of one of the work streams. And we're looking at what that means. I think it means a lot of things, right? But particularly funding. Do you think we need more funds focused specifically on investing with entrepreneurs of diverse backgrounds? Or do you think it should come naturally as we create more opportunities for diverse entrepreneurs to be in the field?
Yeah, I know there are a few funds that are focused on diverse founders that have emerged. And I think that's probably a step in the right direction. But I do think, as what I've seen, these are relatively small pools of capital. So I don't think they're going to make, I don't want to, they could make some impact, but I don't think they're going to kind of completely change the picture that we're seeing. So I think it needs to sort of ultimately be embedded in the fabric of how, venture capital thinks about investing. And I think the reality is that, a lot of the, venture funds and sort of how you get access to venture funds are through networks. And those networks are built, via, one's own, personal experiences, whether they're from school or whether they're from, prior work or, wherever that may be. And so that, I think by definition may not play to the advantage of some, minority population. So I think that's probably where the focus should be, is on how do you create networks between diverse individuals that would like to consider becoming, having venture funded companies and the venture funds themselves. And I think that network connection is probably the best way to address the gap. So it's not necessarily about creating, specific funds that are focused on this. It's about creating the networks between these types of candidates. And I've seen some efforts that have begun to develop around that in the last year. So I think some of those probably need to be supported and can really help to make a difference here and really building those networks and those connections.
Yeah, one of our Terry Wiley comments to check out the NVCA, which is the National Venture Capital Association Venture Forward effort to address diversity in venture capital funds, which are currently not diverse. And that's actually a nice tie-in. I actually met on Friday with Bobby Franklin, who's the CEO of the NVCA, and we're looking for ways to work together here in New York to do those types of things.
Yeah, and I'm happy to play a role there if it's of interest. So
you've publicly committed yourself.
Yep, you're
on the hook.
I think it's important to also think beyond the founders, right? If you think about it, the founders, proportionally represent a very small share of the actual people, working in the companies and working in the industry, right? So the actual recruitment of folks in your growth phase, as you're building out your senior management team, as you're building out kind of the middle layers of your organization, in a lot of ways, those are the areas where, we kind of fall back in a lot of ways on, the standard recruiting methods. And there's just more people in these positions. And so we had a great guest, I think over the summer, Candace Norte, who joined a firm, Sloan Partners, after a background in education, but solely focused on recruiting, diverse candidates. And it's something where I think we have to have a focus kind of up and down the spectrum, like just looking at venture funds, just looking at, founder recruitment is actually a very small piece of the iceberg. There's a lot more to building a company and kind of a lot more opportunity out there.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah, and for everyone else's benefit, so we have 3 buckets within our task force that we're working on, or 3 pillars. One is equitable access to healthcare and even clinical trials, because that's right where we can make an impact, looking at equity. And the other one is around finance and support of diverse entrepreneurs. And then the third bucket is programs and education and creating a path forward for scientists or science related careers within students of diverse backgrounds. So those are sort of the 3 buckets where we thought the New York biotech community can help move the needle by leveraging a lot of the other good work that companies, frankly, like Pfizer, that have a lot of resources devoted to these things, and others are doing, as well as then creating maybe some new programs.
Yeah. And I think
Kathleen Otto just go ahead.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of inertia out now for this, and I think I think we shouldn't lose the opportunity to really move things forward with the inertia that's out there. And I've seen this, so I think this is the right time to really move forward efforts like that. So really kind of applaud the work that you're doing. I mean, it sounds like it could really make a difference.
Well, that's great. So we have a few minutes left, and I think we can, just close with, what do you see as really the next frontier for Lexio? Where do you see the company going over, say, the next 18 months? What are kind of the big things that you want to nail down, and where do you want to be 2 years from now?
Yeah, so I think our ambition is to be one of the leading fully integrated gene therapy companies, that are out there. I think we see ourselves in a peer group with some of the, public gene therapy companies that are, out there today. So that's, our ambition for kind of where we're headed as well. I think we, in the near term, have some very interesting programs that are, really focused in some diseases of very high unmet needs. So we're excited to really, move these through their stages of clinical development, find ways to get them to patients, both in the U.S. and outside of the U.S. And I think that's really, where we're headed. And hopefully over time, you begin to see more clinical milestones that, that we're meeting, and more, important milestones for the company in terms of its development and, future financings and everything that that entails. So we're, really excited to be, part of the New York biotech community. I think we can hopefully play an important role in the New York biotech community as an active member here, and one of the, kind of prominent gene therapy companies that are, that are located here. And I hope, that, in addition to just, bringing forward, therapies and our own company development, I hope that, Lexio can become kind of an employer of choice for people that are, really interested in an exciting experience in biotech. And I think, we're certainly growing quickly, and we, love to talk to anyone that's interested to work in gene therapy. So for those reasons, I think we're excited about where we're headed, and the role we can play both for patients and, for the biotech community.
Well, we, for one, are thrilled that you are a New York Bio member, and you were an amazing guest. The hour flew by, and I know it did for our listeners as well. Thank you so much, Nolan. Thank you for sharing your story and for your vision for Lexio. We're so proud that you're in our New York community, and we really thank you.
Thank you. Thank you both.
All right, thanks so much, Nolan.
Absolutely. See you both soon.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you for tuning in to New York Bio's virtual breakfast series. Join us every Tuesday at 9 a.m. for more discussions with leaders from across the healthcare spectrum. For more information on New York Bio, please visit us at www.newyorkbio.org.